He thought his son would never hear the world, but he was about to learn that some sounds don't need ears. The crying had gone on for hours, sharp and relentless, echoing through the marble halls of Kang Ji-hyun's mansion in Seoul, a place where silence was supposed to mean control, power, and absolute order. Yet tonight it felt like something was breaking, something no amount of money, influence, or fear could fix. The nursery doors stood slightly open, warm light spilling into the hallway where staff moved carefully, quietly, as if even their footsteps might make things worse. Though everyone already knew the truth, they didn't dare say out loud. The heir of one of the most powerful men in South Korea had been born into a world he could not hear. Kang Min-jun lay in his custom-built crib, wrapped in soft linen imported from Europe, surrounded by devices, specialist recommendations, and failed solutions, his tiny face red, his fists clenched, his cries filling the room without rhythm, without response, without relief, because no matter how loud he screamed, no sound seemed to reach him the way it should. Hours earlier, the last specialist had packed his equipment in quiet resignation, offering polite words that carried no hope, just careful distance, explaining that sometimes these conditions were permanent, sometimes the brain simply did not respond, sometimes the world remained forever silent, and Kang Ji-hyun had listened without expression, his dark eyes unreadable, his posture still, until the door closed behind the doctor, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any verdict. He stood now by the window, city lights stretching endlessly below him, his reflection sharp against the glass. A man known for solving problems before they even existed, a man whose name alone could shift outcomes. Yet behind him, his own son continued to cry in a way that made him feel something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to helplessness. No one spoke. The head housekeeper hovered near the door, hands folded, waiting for instructions that never came, while two security men stood rigidly outside, their presence more symbolic than useful, because no threat in the world felt more immediate than the one inside that room. And then there was Amara Williams, standing just beyond the threshold, barely noticed, just another new hire in a house full of invisible workers, her dark eyes steady as she listened, not to the sound, but to the pattern beneath it, to the pauses, to the tension, to something deeper than noise. She had been in the mansion less than a week, long enough to learn the rules, long enough to understand that crossing boundaries here wasn't just a mistake. It was a risk, but as she watched the small body tremble with each breath, something inside her refused to stay still. The others heard chaos. She heard something missing. Her gaze shifted from the child to the floor beneath the crib, to the faint vibrations barely noticeable unless you knew how to look for them. And in that moment, while the most powerful man in the room stood frozen by what he could not fix, the woman no one had bothered to see took one quiet step forward, her hand tightening slightly around something tucked in her apron, something simple, something ordinary, something no one in this mansion would ever think could matter. And the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Amara did not move quickly, because she understood that in a room filled with fear, sudden motion only made things worse. So her step was measured, almost invisible, the soft sole of her shoe barely whispering against the polished floor as Min-jun's cries continued to rise and fall in uneven waves, each sound sharper than the last, each breath tighter, as if his small body was fighting something it could not understand. And she could feel the tension ripple through the room, the staff holding themselves still, the air thick with expectation and unspoken rules, rules that said she should stop, that she should step back, that she should remember her place. But there was something deeper than rules guiding her now, something older, something learned not from books or doctors, but from moments that looked exactly like this one. Kang Ji-hyun turned slightly at the shift in the room's energy, his gaze landing on her for the first time, really seeing her, not as part of the background, but as a presence moving toward what mattered most to him. And there was a flicker in his eyes, not yet anger, but awareness, sharp and immediate, the kind that had made men twice her size hesitate. Yet Amara did not stop, because she had already made the decision the moment she noticed what everyone else had missed. She stopped beside the crib, not reaching in, not touching the child, just watching, her breathing slow, her focus narrowing to the rhythm beneath the sound, to the slight tremor in the mattress, to the way Min Jun's tiny hands tightened, not when the room grew louder, but when the space around him felt still, disconnected, as if he were searching for something to anchor himself to. "What are you doing?" the head housekeeper whispered, her voice tight with warning, but Amara did not answer, because answering would mean explaining, and explaining would mean doubt, and doubt would cost time the child did not have. Instead, she slipped her hand into the pocket of her apron and closed her fingers around the small object she had carried with her for years, something worn smooth by use, something simple enough to be overlooked anywhere else. But here, in this room filled with expensive solutions that had all failed, it felt almost out of place. Kang Ji-hyun took a step forward now, his presence shifting from observation to control, his voice low when he spoke, steady but edged with authority that did not need to be raised to be obeyed. "Step away from him." The words landed heavy, final, and every instinct in the room responded to them, bodies tightening, eyes lowering, but Amara remained where she was, her gaze still on Min Jun, her hand slowly withdrawing from her apron, revealing the object in her palm. Not polished, not high-tech, nothing that belonged in a mansion like this, just a small handcrafted piece, something designed to create movement rather than sound. The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged, stretching thin as Min Jun's cries hit another peak, his face tightening, his breath catching. And for a brief second, even Kang Ji-hyun hesitated, because there was something in the way she held herself, something steady, something certain, as if she was not guessing, as if she already knew what would happen next, and that certainty was unfamiliar, unsettling, in a place where certainty usually belonged only to him. Amara lowered her hand toward the side of the crib, not touching the child, not speaking, just placing the object gently against the wooden frame, her fingers adjusting it with quiet precision. And then she waited, not looking at anyone else, not seeking permission, only listening in a way that had nothing to do with sound, as the room seemed to hold. Itself still, every breath suspended in the space between what had always been true and what might be about to change. For a fraction of a second, nothing changed. And that nothing felt heavier than anything that had come before, as if the entire room had leaned forward into a silence, so complete it erased even the memory of sound. And then Min Jun's crying shifted, not louder, not softer, but different, the sharp edges of it softening into something uneven, something searching, his tiny body pausing between breaths in a way it had not done all night. And Amara did not move, her hand still resting lightly against the crib where the small object pressed into the wood, creating a faint, steady vibration that traveled through the frame, through the mattress, through the space beneath the child's fragile world. The head housekeeper's breath caught audibly, though she immediately tried to hide it, and one of the security men shifted his weight, confused by what he was witnessing, because nothing visible had changed, no machines had been activated, no instructions had been given, yet something invisible had begun to take hold, something subtle enough to be missed by anyone not looking for it. Kang Ji-hyun's eyes narrowed, not in anger now, but in focus, the kind of focus that had built his empire, dissecting every detail, every movement, every possibility, and he saw it then, not the object itself, but the effect, the way Min Jun's clenched fists loosened slightly, the way his breathing slowed by a fraction, the way his head tilted, almost imperceptibly, toward the side of the crib where Amara's hand remained steady. The crying did not stop all at once, but it changed direction, like a storm losing its center, the chaos unraveling thread by thread, and in its place came something unfamiliar, a pause that stretched just long enough to make everyone in the room realize they were witnessing something none of the specialists had achieved. Amara's gaze remained fixed on the child, her expression calm, but inside, she was measuring every second, every response, adjusting the pressure of her fingers against the object, fine-tuning the vibration, not by numbers or settings, but by instinct, by memory, by something she had learned long before she ever stepped into a place like this. "What is that?" Kang Ji-hyun asked, his voice quieter now, no longer a command. but a question edged with disbelief. And for the first time since she had entered the room, Amara spoke, her voice low, steady, carrying none of the fear that should have been there. "It is not about the sound," she said, not looking at him. "It is about the feeling." The words settled into the room, simple and incomplete, yet somehow enough because at that exact moment, Min Jun's cries stopped completely, not fading, not trailing off, but ending, replaced by a stillness so sudden it felt almost unreal, his chest rising and falling in a slower rhythm, his tiny fingers uncurling as if releasing something he had been holding on to since the moment he was born. The silence that followed was different now, no longer heavy with helplessness, but fragile, like something new had been placed in the center of the room, and no one dared to disturb it. Kang Ji-hyun took another step closer, his eyes locked on his son, watching for any sign that this was temporary, that it would break, that would disappear the way hope often did. But instead, Min Jun turned his head slightly more toward the vibration, his face softening, the tension leaving his small body in a way that made it look as though he had finally found something to hold on to in a world that had given him nothing but confusion. And then, so small it could have been missed, a change appeared at the corner of his mouth, the faintest upward movement. Not yet a full smile, but the beginning of one, the first hint that something inside him was responding, not to sound, but to something deeper, something that had been there all along, waiting for someone who knew how to reach it. The room remained in a fragile silence as Kang Ji-hyun took another step closer, the weight of his presence palpable yet strangely restrained, as if he were testing the boundaries of a new reality he had not anticipated, and Amara kept her focus entirely on Min Jun, her hands steady, her breathing controlled, allowing the faint vibration from the object she held to communicate a rhythm that was both subtle and reassuring. A pulse that seemed to sync with the child's tiny heartbeat, not forcing anything, not commanding anything, just inviting response, a delicate coaxing rather than instruction, and slowly, imperceptibly, the tension in the boy's body eased. His hands opening fully, his legs stretching with a small sigh that was more relief than sound. The first movement that indicated recognition, the first sign that he understood, not with ears, but with some innate awareness that had been waiting all along for someone who knew how to reach him. Kang Ji-hyun's expression shifted, a flicker of disbelief softening into a focus that was almost reverent, his dark eyes scanning the scene with an intensity that matched the significance of the moment, noticing the way the child's tiny shoulders relaxed, the way his eyes, previously clouded with frustration and confusion, now held a trace of curiosity, a spark of engagement, and for the first time, the father allowed himself to step aside from the instinct to control, to intervene, to command, and simply watch, to witness the quiet miracle unfolding in the space he had long assumed was beyond his influence, a realization that power and love could intersect in ways he had not previously imagined. Amara adjusted her hands gently, tilting the object to enhance the subtle vibration, careful to maintain the delicate balance that had prompted this response, and she noticed the small but unmistakable shifts in Min Jun's breathing, the gentle flutter of his eyelids, the micro-expressions that signaled comprehension without sound, and she understood that this was more than a temporary change, more than a reaction to a novelty. It was the first bridge connecting him to a world he had never experienced, a world mediated not by traditional senses, but by the careful attention of someone who had seen and felt the unspoken cues. The head housekeeper, usually the epitome of restraint, could not hide the tension in her shoulders, her gaze alternating between the child and the woman who had dared to intervene, while the two security personnel outside the room exchanged glances that spoke of astonishment and tentative hope, a recognition that what they were witnessing could not be explained by procedure or protocol, only by insight and patience. Kang Ji-hyun exhaled slowly, a sound almost unnoticed but heavy with significance, and he finally stepped fully into the room, maintaining a respectful distance, his posture straight but unintrusive, acknowledging the delicate interplay between Amara and his son, and for the first time, he saw her not as a subordinate, not as a temporary presence, but as an agent of transformation, someone who had bridged a gap that all his wealth, influence, and knowledge had failed to span. And as Min Jun's small fingers moved toward the source of the vibration, exploring it with tentative curiosity, a subtle smile beginning to form on his lips, Kang Ji-hyun felt a shift within himself, a softening that was unexpected, unplanned, but profound, a recognition that in the quiet, attentive care of another, even the most isolated soul could begin to respond, to connect, and perhaps to thrive. And in that moment, the room held its collective breath, every observer aware that something extraordinary had occurred, something simple yet infinitely meaningful, a reminder that patience, understanding, and subtle guidance could change a life in ways that power alone never could. Min Jun's small hands explored the object more confidently now, his tiny fingers tracing the surface with wonder, a quiet fascination replacing the earlier tension. And Amara watched with careful patience, her body relaxed but fully present, as she adjusted the object just enough to maintain the subtle vibration that seemed to speak directly to him, without a word, without sound. Only a gentle rhythm that resonated deep within his awareness, the room holding its collective breath as the fragile connection took root. Kang Ji-hyun remained still, observing intently, his usual composure tempered by a mixture of disbelief and awe, the kind that comes from witnessing a moment that defies explanation, a moment where control is not asserted through command but through quiet, intentional care. And he felt a shift in his perspective, a softening of the rigid barriers he had placed around his son, the realization that love and attention, carefully guided, could reach where expertise and power alone had failed. Amara's eyes never left Min Jun, noting every micro-expression, every subtle shift in his body, the way his chest rose and fell with a steadier rhythm, the way his lips parted slightly, as if tasting the air in a new way, the tiny movements that signaled recognition, understanding, and the beginning of trust. She adjusted her posture slightly, leaning just enough to maintain the connection without disturbing the child, and with each passing second, the room's atmosphere changed, tension giving way to cautious hope, the air no longer heavy, but charged with possibility, a delicate energy that seemed to bind everyone present in quiet anticipation. Kang Jae-hyun took another measured step closer, his eyes softening as he noticed the subtle shift in Min Jun's expression, a faint spark of engagement lighting the child's dark eyes, and he understood for the first time that the smallest gestures, the simplest interventions, could carry the most profound impact, a lesson in patience and observation that no amount of authority could teach. And he allowed himself to exhale, releasing a breath he had held unconsciously since entering the room. A sound so slight it was almost imperceptible, but heavy with relief. The head housekeeper's gaze remained fixed on Amara and the child, her body tense, but her mind racing to process the unfolding miracle, while the security personnel outside the nursery doors exchanged glances that mirrored the awe and cautious optimism within, recognizing that what was occurring was beyond protocol, beyond expectation, something almost impossible, yet undeniably real. Min Jun's fingers continued to explore, tracing patterns that seemed to connect him to the vibration, his small body slowly relaxing into the rhythm. And Amara mirrored him, her movements subtle but deliberate, guiding the experience without intruding, allowing the child to discover the sensation on his own terms, to respond freely, safely, and naturally. Kang Ji-hyun observed, noting how the connection between caregiver and child unfolded without coercion, without instructions, a silent dialogue that transcended conventional communication. And in that quiet observation, he felt an unexpected tenderness, a realization that his son's world could expand in ways he had not imagined, that patience, attention, and care could open doors no amount of money or influence could unlock. And as Min Jun's tiny body settled into calm, his lips curling, slightly into a hesitant but genuine smile, the room seemed to exhale collectively, a shared moment of triumph and wonder. And in that instant, The mansion, with all its grandeur and authority, became a space defined not only by power, but by the profound impact of empathy, presence, and the quiet heroism of one person willing to see, understand, and act. Amara's movements remained deliberate, precise, her hands hovering over the object without pressure, allowing the subtle vibrations to continue without interruption, and Min Jun's reactions became more pronounced with each passing moment, the corners of his mouth lifting further into a small, hesitant smile, his fingers now grasping lightly at the side of the crib, as if he had discovered a new sense. A hidden dimension of perception that had eluded him until this point, while calm. Ji-hyun stepped slightly closer, his presence no longer commanding, but quietly observing, an almost imperceptible shift in his posture signaling the beginning of trust, the kind that comes only when witnessing the success of patience and care. And he noticed for the first time how the small changes in the child's posture, the subtle adjustment of his hands, the slight easing of tension in his tiny shoulders, all indicated understanding, and perhaps even comfort, in a world he had never truly been able to hear, the realization settling over him like sunlight through a narrow window, illuminating an entirely new perspective on what it meant to connect. The head housekeeper remained at the edge of the room, her expression a mixture of awe and careful restraint, silently acknowledging the impact of the actions unfolding before her, while the security personnel outside the doors maintained their vigilance. Though their rigid stances had softened slightly, the extraordinary events inside the nursery commanding attention without words or explanation. The collective energy in the room shifting subtly as the impossible became evident. A transformation so quiet and profound that it demanded notice. Amara adjusted the angle of the object, the vibrations now perfectly in tune with the natural rhythm of Min Jun's tiny body, the coordination delicate yet effective, a synchrony that spoke not through sound, but through an intuitive sense of presence. And she could see the results immediately, the child's lips curving into a fuller smile, his body leaning slightly into the vibrations, a tentative yet unmistakable engagement. The first sign of curiosity and awareness in a domain that had been previously silent and unyielding. And for a moment, the room felt suspended, time stretching as every observer recognized the significance of what was occurring, the power of subtle guidance and attentiveness transcending the limitations of conventional communication, reaching directly to the child's awareness in a way that no other intervention had managed. Kang Ji-hyun's eyes softened, his focus on his son unrelenting yet unintrusive, absorbing every detail of the child's newfound responsiveness, and he realized that this was more than a temporary response, more than a fleeting improvement. It was a demonstration of connection, of trust, of potential, opening a door he had long assumed closed, the awareness settling deep within him. An unexpected lesson in humility and observation, and he allowed himself a slow, controlled breath, the tension in his shoulders, easing slightly as he acknowledged the quiet heroism of the woman before him, her steady hands, calm presence, and deep attentiveness. And Min Jun's small fingers continued to explore the source of the vibrations with increasing confidence, his eyes reflecting fascination and engagement, the soft smile on his lips spreading gradually into a more assured expression, a visible sign of understanding and comfort. And the room, once heavy with uncertainty, now pulsed with a quiet sense of accomplishment and hope, a shared acknowledgement that the impossible could be reached not through authority, not through expertise alone, but through patient, intentional, and empathetic care, a moment that would linger in the awareness of everyone present, defining the nursery as a place of subtle transformation and profound human connection. The soft smile on Min Jun's lips widened slightly as he began to reach toward Amara's hand, the tiny fingers curling with cautious confidence, exploring not just the vibrations of the object but the space between them, a bridge forming silently that required no words, and Amara mirrored his movements, adjusting her hand to maintain the delicate pulse, her focus unwavering, her presence a steadying force in the room. creating an invisible rhythm that connected them, teaching the child through subtlety rather than sound, through sensation rather than command. And Kang Ji-hyun observed every detail. The intensity in his dark eyes softened into a quiet awe, noting the way Min Jun's body relaxed with each careful adjustment, the way his small head tilted ever so slightly toward the source of the vibrations, and the faint movement of his lips, evidence of comprehension, of engagement, of recognition that had been absent all his life. The head housekeeper, still stationed near the door, could not hide her astonishment, her eyes wide, her hands folded tightly in front of her as she processed the miracle occurring before her, while the two security personnel outside remained motionless, their postures rigid but their awareness heightened, sensing that what was unfolding was something extraordinary, a testament to patience, attentiveness, and understanding, rather than any conventional solution or protocol. And the atmosphere in the nursery shifted, charged now with hope, anticipation, and the quiet thrill of witnessing transformation in its purest form. Amara's attention never wavered. She adjusted the angle of the object slightly, just enough to enhance the vibrations, her fingers gentle, precise, and full of intent, and Min Jun's response became more pronounced, his small hands exploring with increasing curiosity, his body leaning slightly forward as if inviting the sensation, the first real evidence that he was learning, that he was connecting, that the world, previously silent and unreachable, had opened just a little to him. Kang Ji-hyun took a step closer, careful not to disturb the fragile interaction, feeling a soft shift within himself, an awareness of the value of patience, observation, and quiet guidance, understanding that his authority, though immense, had limitations, and that influence without empathy could not achieve the results he was now witnessing, a lesson delivered by the gentle hands and steadfast focus of a person who had seen, understood, and acted where he had been powerless. The child's small fingers traced the contours of the object with intent, the faintest curve of smile appearing on his lips as comprehension settled in his expression, and Amara allowed a small, approving nod, a quiet affirmation of the connection established, not spoken, not loud, but deeply felt, and in that shared space, every observer in the room, from the most experienced security officer to the housekeeper, felt the weight of the moment, the significance of a child beginning to understand, to engage, and to trust, all achieved through patience, attention, and the courage to act when others hesitated. And Kang Ji-hyun finally exhaled, a slow, deliberate breath that carried relief, recognition, and a subtle, unspoken respect for the woman who had bridged a gap he himself had thought insurmountable, while Min Jun's eyes, bright and curious, remained fixed on the gentle pulse of the object, and the room, once filled with tension and quiet despair, now resonated with a calm, profound sense of possibility, the invisible threads of understanding and trust weaving together in new, fragile harmony that promised more than anyone had dared to hope for. The moment felt suspended in time as Min Jun's small fingers continued to explore the object, his tiny body adjusting instinctively to the gentle vibrations that now seemed almost like a language, a silent dialogue between him and Amara, who maintained her calm focus, her hands steady, her movements deliberate, ensuring the rhythm remained consistent, a pulse that resonated through the crib, through the mattress, through the child's fragile awareness, bridging the gap that had seemed insurmountable just moments ago. And Kang Ji-hyun watched closely, his dark eyes sharp yet softened by the all he could not fully conceal, recognizing for the first time that authority and influence were not the only ways to effect change, that sometimes the quiet, patient intervention of someone who understood could accomplish what power alone could not. The head housekeeper stood at the edge of the room, her posture rigid yet attentive, sensing the delicate shift in energy, while the security personnel outside the doors remained in place, their presence more a testament to protocol than necessity, as the unfolding events rendered traditional measures secondary to observation and trust, and the atmosphere in the nursery changed, the tension giving way to anticipation. A collective recognition that something extraordinary was happening, something that could not be quantified or predicted, only felt and witnessed. Amara adjusted the angle of the object subtly, fine-tuning the vibrations, and Min-jun responded immediately, his movements more fluid, his hands reaching with purpose, his eyes bright with curiosity and engagement, the small smile on his lips widening slightly as he connected with the sensation in a way that had eluded him for months, perhaps years, and Kang Ji-hyun noticed the meticulous care in every motion, the thoughtfulness in the subtle guidance, the way the child's response was coaxed, without force, without words, only through attentiveness and patience, a lesson in influence and empathy that he absorbed quietly, deeply. The child's chest rose and fell with a steadier rhythm, his small head tilting in response to the vibrations, the room vibrating with a new sense of calm, a fragile harmony that seemed to settle over everyone present, a shared understanding that something significant had occurred, the beginning of a connection that had previously been denied by circumstance, and Kang Ji-hyun felt a warmth in his chest, unfamiliar and compelling. An awareness that this small, deliberate act had opened a door he had thought forever closed, and he took another step closer, careful to respect the space between Amara and his son, observing without interference, allowing the interaction to continue organically. The subtle engagement of Min-jun, the gentle guidance of Amara, and the silent watchfulness of Kang Ji-hyun created a balance, a rhythm in the room that conveyed understanding and care without words, a lesson in patience, observation, and the profound impact of quiet action. And as the child's hands explored more confidently, his tiny body relaxed, the corners of his mouth lifting in a tentative, genuine expression of recognition and comfort, the room collectively sensing the extraordinary nature of the moment, a shared experience of hope and transformation that transcended all expectations, leaving each observer with the undeniable impression that something remarkable had just occurred, a reminder that empathy, attentiveness, and intentional care could open doors even where conventional measures had failed, and that the world of the silent could be reached with nothing more than presence, patience, and understanding. And in that suspended moment, the nursery became a place of quiet triumph, profound connection, and the fragile beginning of trust. Min-jun's small eyes followed the subtle movements of the object, his tiny hands now confidently tracing its shape as he absorbed the vibration, and Amara's steady presence remained the anchor in the room, her fingers adjusting delicately, guiding the experience without words, without hurry, creating a rhythm that communicated understanding and care more powerfully than any voice could, while Kang Ji-hyun observed closely, his dark eyes softened by the rare sight of patience translating into tangible progress, a lesson unfolding before him in real time, teaching that influence is not measured by command or authority, but by attentiveness, empathy, and subtle guidance. And he felt a quiet admiration for the woman who had bridged the unbridgeable, her movements precise, intentional, and imbued with a sense of calm certainty that contrasted sharply with the high-stakes environment he was used to controlling. The head housekeeper's gaze never wavered, standing at the edge of the room with an awareness sharpened by the extraordinary display of skill and intuition, while the security personnel outside remained vigilant, their bodies rigid, yet the tension that had previously gripped the room had softened, replaced by a sense of collective anticipation and awe as the child's responses became more pronounced, his tiny body leaning into the gentle pulse, his chest rising and falling in a steady calm, rhythm that mirrored the subtle vibration of the object. Amara shifted slightly, maintaining perfect alignment with Min-jun's movements, the connection between them invisible yet palpable, an unspoken conversation carried entirely through attention, care, and precise motion, and she noted the small details, the micro changes in his expression, the way his small fingers flexed with interest, the softening around his eyes, signs that he was discovering a new channel of perception, and she adjusted the object just enough to keep the communication flowing, never rushing. never forcing, allowing him to engage at his own pace. Kang Ji-hyun took a cautious step closer, his hands clasped lightly in front of him, absorbing the scene, his usual posture of control softened by a quiet fascination as he realized that this simple, deliberate act was producing more meaningful results than anything his wealth, his influence, or his authority had ever achieved, and a small part of him acknowledged the quiet power of presence, observation, and patience. A lesson not often learned in a life ruled by command, but one that now unfolded clearly before him. Min Jun's tiny smile widened further as he explored the vibrations, his fingers curling around the edges of the crib, his head tilting toward the source of the rhythm with a trust that had not existed before, and the room seemed to settle into a collective breath, the tension replaced by quiet satisfaction and hope, an acknowledgement by everyone present that something extraordinary had occurred, a subtle transformation that spoke volumes, demonstrating that understanding, care, and patience could bridge gaps thought insurmountable, and that even in a world defined by control and expectation, connection could flourish through the simplest, most intentional acts, leaving a lasting impression of calm, trust, and the quiet beginnings of something profound. The room was filled with a quiet anticipation as Min Jun's tiny hands continued to explore the vibrations of the object, his small body leaning slightly forward with curiosity, a gentle focus in his eyes that spoke of understanding far beyond his age, and Amara maintained her calm, steady presence, adjusting the angle of the object with delicate precision, ensuring the rhythm remained consistent, the subtle pulses communicating more than words could convey, creating an invisible bridge between her and the child, a connection built entirely on attention, patience, and gentle guidance. Kang Ji-hyun stood nearby, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp, watching every micro-movement of his son, noting the way Min Jun's lips curled ever so slightly into a confident smile, the way his chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, the subtle shift of his tiny shoulders as tension ebbed away, and he felt an unfamiliar sense of awe, a quiet acknowledgement that true influence could not be forced. That power alone could not achieve what careful attention could, and he allowed himself to simply observe, absorbing the lesson unfolding before him. The head housekeeper, stationed at the edge of the room, could not hide the sense of wonder in her expression, her eyes wide as she witnessed the transformation, while the security personnel outside the door remained vigilant yet softened in stance, sensing the extraordinary significance of what was occurring inside. The stillness of the room, punctuated only by the child's small movements and the faint, rhythmic vibrations from the object. Amara shifted her hands slightly, fine-tuning the pulse to match the natural responses of Min Jun's body, and he responded immediately, his fingers tracing the contours with increasing confidence, his head tilting toward the source of the vibrations with a trust that had been absent before, and the corners of his mouth lifted into a small, genuine smile, an expression of recognition, engagement, and curiosity, the first sign that he was connecting in a meaningful way with the world around him. Kang Ji-hyun's eyes softened, a rare warmth appearing as he saw the impact of Amara's careful guidance, the subtle power of presence and empathy that could accomplish more than authority or instruction ever could, and he took a step closer, mindful not to disrupt the delicate balance, acknowledging silently the quiet heroism of the woman who had bridged a gap he had long assumed insurmountable. Min Jun's engagement deepened, his tiny fingers moving more confidently, his eyes brightening with awareness and fascination. The rhythm of the vibrations now a shared language between the child and Amara, and she adjusted her focus to maintain the connection, her movements gentle and deliberate, allowing him to explore and respond at his own pace, reinforcing trust and curiosity rather than imposing direction. The room seemed to pulse with a shared energy of understanding, a fragile harmony that encompassed everyone present, the tension giving way to calm, the anticipation transforming into quiet satisfaction as the child responded to the guidance with clarity and openness, and Kang Ji-hyun allowed himself a slow, deliberate breath, a subtle acknowledgement of the profound impact of attentive care, observation, and patience. Witnessing the quiet transformation of his son, and in that moment, the nursery became a space defined not by authority or control, but by connection, empathy, and the extraordinary power of simple, intentional actions, leaving an impression of hope, trust, and the beginning of an enduring bond that had been fostered through presence and understanding. Amara adjusted her posture slightly, ensuring the vibrations from the object remained perfectly aligned with Min Jun's subtle movements, her eyes soft but focused, observing every twitch of his tiny fingers, every shift of his small body as he engaged with the new sensation, and with each passing moment, the child's confidence grew, the earlier hesitation replaced by curiosity and cautious exploration, the corners of his lips lifting further into a smile that conveyed understanding, engagement, and comfort, and Kang Jae-hyun remained still, absorbing the transformation quietly, his dark eyes scanning every detail, noting the patience, the precision, and the calm authority that Amara exhibited, recognizing that influence and trust could be established without command, only through presence and attentive guidance. And he felt an unfamiliar warmth, a softening of the rigid control he was accustomed to exercising in every other aspect of his life. The head housekeeper, observing from the threshold, could not hide the mixture of awe and cautious optimism in her expression, while the security personnel remained poised outside, their eyes fixed on the door, yet softened by the extraordinary scene unfolding within, understanding that this moment transcended routine and required only observation and respect for the delicate interaction between child and caregiver. Amara shifted her hand just enough to maintain the subtle rhythm, allowing Min Jun to adjust, respond, and engage at his own pace, and he reacted with small, deliberate movements, his body leaning slightly toward the vibration, his head tilting to better sense the pulse, his tiny chest rising and falling with steady confidence, the smile on his face widening, revealing a growing awareness and comprehension of the world around him. And Kang Jae-hyun's gaze softened further, registering the impact of quiet, intentional care, the lesson of patience and presence resonating deeply within him as he realized that connection could flourish in ways that authority alone could never achieve. Min Jun's small hands traced the object with increasing precision, the subtle pulse now a language of reassurance and discovery, and Amara mirrored him carefully, guiding without interference, encouraging engagement rather than dictating it, her eyes never leaving his, communicating trust and attention through the simplicity of her movements, and the room seemed to breathe in unison. The tension of hours of frustration and silence giving way to hope, recognition, and a fragile sense of triumph. Kang Jae-hyun stepped just enough closer to see the subtle expressions on his son's face, noting the way his tiny fingers flexed and released, the way his eyes reflected curiosity and understanding, and he allowed himself a slow, measured breath, a quiet acknowledgement of the profound significance of the moment, understanding that the extraordinary results came not from wealth, influence, or instruction, but from patient observation, empathy, and careful guidance. The head housekeeper and security personnel, witnessing the small but remarkable transformations, felt the weight of the moment, a shared recognition that what they observed was more than a simple change. It was a bridge between worlds, an opening for connection and trust where none had existed before. And in that room, filled with soft light and the gentle rhythm of the object, Min Jun's small body relaxed completely, his smile confident and genuine, the vibrations creating a rhythm that spoke, louder than any words. And Amara's steady presence ensured that every movement, every response, and every tiny gesture contributed to a lasting sense of understanding, trust, and the quiet beginning of a bond that promised more than anyone had dared to expect, leaving a profound impression on all who were present. The room settled into a profound quiet, the kind that follows an unexpected revelation, and Amara's hands remained poised, her movements deliberate yet gentle, maintaining the delicate pulse of the object as Min-jun explored its vibrations with increasing awareness and confidence, his small fingers curling and uncurling as he engaged more deeply, his eyes bright and focused, reflecting comprehension and curiosity. And Kang Ji-hyun stood nearby, his dark eyes fixed on his son, absorbing each subtle movement, each slight change in posture, each tiny shift in expression, noticing how the child's chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm, the tension leaving his small body as engagement replaced apprehension. And in that quiet observation, the father felt a softness he had not expected, a recognition of the power of patience, understanding, and careful attention. A lesson in influence that could not be learned through authority alone. The head housekeeper remained at the threshold, her posture rigid but her eyes wide with astonishment, silently witnessing the unfolding transformation, while the security personnel outside held their positions, aware of the extraordinary nature of the moment, the subtle energy in the room commanding respect and focus as everyone present processed the significance of what was occurring, understanding that the child's newfound engagement was not the result of any conventional method, but the careful guidance, presence, and attentive care of Amara. She adjusted the object slightly, fine-tuning the vibrations to align perfectly with Min-jun's subtle responses, and the child reacted immediately, leaning into the gentle pulse, his tiny body moving fluidly, his hands tracing the edges with purpose, exploring a world that had previously been inaccessible, the corners of his lips lifting into a small, confident smile, a visible sign of comprehension and curiosity. And Kang Jae-hyun felt a rare and unexpected surge of emotion, a warmth that he had not permitted himself to feel, a deep appreciation for the quiet heroism of the woman who had bridged a gap that no amount of wealth, authority, or preparation could have closed. The child's breathing settled into a steady pattern, his fingers flexing and releasing with confidence, the subtle smile on his face growing slightly wider, the engagement in his eyes unmistakable, and Amara mirrored his movements with precision, maintaining the rhythm that had enabled him to discover this new sense of interaction, a silent dialogue conveyed entirely through touch and vibration, a language without words that spoke to trust, understanding, and connection. And Kang Jae-hyun observed, aware of the significance, absorbing the lesson in attentiveness and empathy, realizing that the bond forming before him was delicate yet profound, a transformation achieved not through force, instruction, or power, but through patience, presence, and the willingness to act with insight and care. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as Min-jun explored the vibrations further, his tiny hands confident, his body relaxed, his expression bright with engagement and curiosity, and Amara's steady presence ensured that each small movement reinforced trust and understanding, her eyes never leaving him, communicating patience, guidance, and reassurance without uttering a single word. And in that suspended moment, Kang Jae-hyun allowed himself to acknowledge the extraordinary significance of the scene, a quiet affirmation of the profound impact of attentive care, empathy, and presence, leaving everyone in the room with a sense of awe and hope. The nursery now transformed into a space defined by understanding, connection, and the gentle beginnings of trust that promised lasting impact on the child's world. The room held a stillness that felt almost sacred, the gentle vibrations from the object continuing to communicate with Min-jun as his small fingers explored its surface with confidence and curiosity, and Amara maintained her calm, steady presence, her hands adjusting delicately, ensuring the rhythm remained consistent, a silent dialogue that allowed the child to engage with the world in a way that had previously been impossible, while Kang Ji-hyun observed closely, his dark eyes softened with awe, recognizing the profound impact of patient attention, empathy, and deliberate action, understanding that influence could manifest through presence rather than command, and that the quiet guidance of one person could unlock potential that had seemed unreachable. The head housekeeper remained at the threshold, witnessing the scene with wide eyes, a mixture of respect and wonder evident in her posture. while the security personnel outside maintained their positions, their vigilance unwavering yet tempered by the extraordinary display occurring within, a transformation so subtle yet significant that it defied conventional expectations. A reminder that connection and understanding could transcend all formal measures. Min Jun's body leaned into the vibrations naturally, his chest rising and falling with steady confidence, his eyes bright and engaged, reflecting comprehension and a burgeoning sense of curiosity. And the small smile on his lips grew, signaling trust and comfort in the interaction, a visible expression of the child's newfound awareness. Amara's gentle adjustments ensured that the pulse remained synchronized with the child's movements, her presence a grounding force, allowing him to explore freely while still feeling supported, and in that careful balance, the room seemed to breathe collectively, the tension of prior hours replaced with quiet satisfaction and a sense of accomplishment. Kang Ji-hyun stepped slightly closer, mindful not to intrude, his gaze fixed on his son, absorbing each subtle movement, each flicker of expression, each tiny adjustment that indicated understanding, and he felt a rare warmth, a deep recognition of the power of patience, observation, and empathetic action, the kind that could create change where authority and instruction alone could not. And he exhaled slowly, allowing the weight of the moment to settle, appreciating the significance of what had been achieved through the careful interplay between caregiver and child. The child's small hands continued to explore confidently, tracing the edges and surfaces with purpose, responding to the vibrations with a sense of connection that had been absent for months, and Amara mirrored his movements precisely, maintaining the rhythm, the focus, and the steady support that allowed him to feel secure and engaged, demonstrating the profound impact of presence and attentiveness. Kang Ji-hyun observed silently, understanding that the bond forming before him was